Good evening, Patah Heights. This is Seven More coming to you again from Anchor by Spotify. And so we are back again, obviously, and we're going to be picking up with some information, with some, again, with the study that we've been doing. You know, I've been doing some, of course, I'm always doing what I need to do to bring you this information that is you, as I often say. And I want you to pay a close attention because I'm going to, as I always do, elucidate some stuff to you that you're not aware of. I know most people are not, and that's not a put down or anything, but as I often say, it's just so critical to know thyself so that there's nothing that is imposed upon you that you have to take from other energies that come to dilute or come to bring you a burden of, how can I put this? Come to bring you a burden that is not warranted, one that is not you, and one that is imposed upon you by forces and by energy vampires who somehow or another see themselves at a deficit. You understand what I mean? And so you don't want your energy to see, because your energy, what I'm going to be giving you today, I'm going to pick up where I left off, but I also want to share with you kind of a preview of the next podcast that we're potentially going to probably looking into. And this is, as always, I'm going to just bring you some real profound stuff. And what we're going to be talking about in that next podcast, Creator Willing, and, if, of course, for the most part, we won't deviate, because we're going to be talking about sacred secretion. That'll be in the next podcast. But what I'm gonna do here now, in a moment, is to mention some of these things to you, and trying to give you a general idea of what they relate to and how powerful they are for your ascension. Now, just off the top of my head, because of all the studying that I do, and I have to actually do more, is, this whole religious thing, and because religion is not spirituality, but spirituality is actually the template that religion is borrowed from to create or to formalize or to structure this construct of religion. Spirituality is the template. Religion is not the template. Spirituality is the template, meaning that forms of religion and dogma and theorem in terms of how you formulate a religious sect or body of belief. You follow me? So that comes out of spirituality. And oftentimes, you'll hear religious people, not spiritual people, but you'll hear religious people say, asinine things like the Kemites, they worship many gods. They didn't. And I've said this before. They did not worship many gods. They looked at the Neteru. In other words, Neteru means nature. Okay, so they looked at nature, and what they were able to do was looking at nature and they begin to depict things out of nature to formulate things that were spiritual. You follow me? So this is where a lot of people actually get it wrong. They get it wrong because they say, oh, they were idol worshipers. And that's what religion does to you. You understand what I'm saying? See, because out of spirituality, which religion is formulate and they have their construct in religion, okay, is where people oftentimes get misconstrued, and they get tangled up because they don't have a clue or an idea as to what spirituality really is. So that's where the confusion comes in. It comes in that form because people have been so religious for so long, they don't know what spirituality really is. You understand what I'm saying? And so it is the formulation of of religion that has really messed up people. Point in case. It's like right now, people are waiting for a savior to come back and to snatch them up. So in the meantime, what are you going to do? You see what I'm saying? What are you going to do? You just wait for somebody to snatch you up into a sky or heaven without you doing anything. And going to a building for a man to preach over a podium to make you excited and for you to jump up and down, slobbering at the mouth and all this kind of stuff. You know what I'm saying? And speaking in what you call tongues, stuff you don't even understand or don't have a clue of what it really is. You call it the Holy Spirit or the Holy Ghost, but you don't have no interpretation of what it really is because in that religious formulation, there is no structure. There's really no structure as to what things mean and what they are. It hasn't been taught to you properly that spirituality is really what the religion of your ancestors really is, if you understand, and understand what I'm saying. That is the religion that formulates out of spirituality that was given not only to your ancestors, but to the world. And you've been robbed. You've been duped. Unfortunately, you've been duped because you don't understand or understand what it is. See, because if you did, you would understand, and understand that it is spirituality that's going to create your ascension. Which when you read in your Bible, it talks about the rapture. But the way it's been interpreted to you is that you don't have to do anything but go to a building. You see the do you really see the absurdity in that? I mean, you follow me? Do you see the absurdity in that? Because it means that you don't have to do nothing. See, and it's really about structuring you becoming that divine proportion, as we talked about before, that sacred geometry, that you begin to exercise your spiritual or your ethereal spiritual self so that you can have that ascension. You understand? That's really what it's all about. So that you are in that aura, you know what I mean? That magnetic field. And this is what I want to give you very briefly. So that you're in that magnetic field of inferior posture of ascension. So when that space actually moves to a transition, you will just flow right into it. Okay? So what I'm going to do, this is what Pythagoras says. In Egypt, there was a temple. Now listen to this. This is real profound. So it's letting you know when Pythagoras is giving credit to the Kemites, it lets you know that the Kemites are ancestors. They were the teachers They were the global teachers of the world in terms of spirituality. Now, I will say this, and I've listened to people like, and this is coming from, excuse me, Manly P. Hall. Okay, now I will say that there are people, as far as theorem is concerned, as far as theory, they're able to adapt theory, but whether or not being six, the term that we've been using, because you are 9 ether, and whether or not being 6 ether allows you to really tap in spiritually to the higher source. Now, there may be some level of where you can tap into a minimal point, but you can't go any higher. So there are people who are actually teaching the science of your ancestors, which a lot of you are not even aware of. A lot of you don't even know. There are a lot of people teaching the science of your ancestors, right? Okay. And you don't even know it. Now, these same people, I would venture to even say, are not privy to being able to ascend to the 9 ether level because of their makeup. And because they're 6 ether, they may be able to have the aptitude to be able to teach in theory. And so it behooves us, of course, to get the information, but I would rather get it from a 9 ether entity that can tap into, you follow me, that can tap into the higher source of that ether realm. Okay, but I'm going to read something to you. And this is what Pythagoras said. Egypt, there was a temple in which therapy was the contemplation of geometric solids. In other words, therapy was the image of mathematical cubes, octagons, and various forms of what they call the vocaclons or something like that. Okay, each one placed upon an altar or a pedestal for the contemplation for Sephra. All was symmetrical geometric solids, perfect and complete. Instruction to look upon them was therapeutic. To look upon them accepted their energy as a reality in our lives or in their lives. So in other words, the structures in Kemet, or what the Greeks name Egypt, these structures that you see, the huge pillars that are like, 160 feet tall or whatever they are, these structures were altars and pedestals that when they looked upon them, and this is why when you see people go to Kemet and they're looking at the structures, they're in awe, because what is actually happening is they're being therapeutically induced when they're looking at them. Now, ain't that powerful? So it lets you know that our ancestors were the progenitors and the architects of everything that you can name. Okay? They were the architects of therapy, and this is so deep, this is so profound, that spiritual therapeutics. So in other words, again, when you looked upon these structures, and it says, each one placed upon an altar or pedestal for the contemplation for Sephra. All was symmetrical and geometrical solids, perfect and complete instruction. They were perfect and complete instruction. To look upon them was therapeutic. To look upon them accepted their energy as a reality in our lives. Though the solid stone structure weren't alive, they only gave their appearance of value, but actually they were alive. So the structures actually were living organisms. The structures were living organisms. And so they created, now listen to this, they created a fierce of energy that when you looked upon them, because in fact, they had the carvings of the very entities or people who were looking upon them. So when they looked upon them, it was like they were looking in an inferior mirror, in an inferior aura, spiritual aura, a mirror of seeing their souls. So they were actually, when they looked upon these things, they were seeing their spirits and they were seeing their souls. Now, that's powerful. That's deep. They were seeing their souls, their celestial auras and their celestial souls. Now, listen. And he didn't say that, but that's what I'm saying. Because that's what he's really saying. That's what he's really saying. And so this is why I say those who are actually able to elucidate the theory of the Kemites, of our ancestors, they're not going to say everything. And this is why it's important for you to understand spiritually what is being said. Okay? And now, it says, every form in nature, natural or artificial, has a magnetic field. Okay? Has a magnetic field. So now, this is talking about you. You have a magnetic field. And so this is why it's so very important for you to understand this. Like every organ in your body has a magnetic field which is operational and functioning in perfect symmetry to do what it needs to do to keep you functional. You understand? So listen. From the tiniest atom to the greatest galaxy, but the rules, let me read this again. From the tiniest atom to the greatest galaxy, the magnetic fields are present, but the rules of each of them must be obeyed. So in other words, your magnetic field is organized and ran by a system that aligns, a spiritual system that has to align with the order of the universe. And if it doesn't, you throw your whole magnetic field off. And then therefore you block yourself from receiving from the universe, because the universe is in perfect symmetrical, geometrical symmetry, is in a divine order of law. Now, an individual looking at a geometric solid, sees in it a perfect proportion, and you heard me say that word before, proportion, when we were talking about divine proportion. He sees in its perfect proportion, this realization enters into the subconscious of the person, that the imagery is sent into subconscious of the person as a benevolent magnetic center. And I'm going to just stop right there. See, because that's just a little tidbit of what we're going to talk about in the next podcast. Okay? So, but I want you to understand and understand that your magnetic field is set up within your solar system, the sun beaming down and creating, the sun giving you everything within your solar system to keep your magnetic field and everything operational within that spiritual construct of everything that's supposed to be happening within you and without of you. So let's let's go on. So now here we are, and the subject of this podcast, and I took 20 minutes talking about that, but it's all good. And this is from the last study. As I said, we was going to do a series, and this is talking about the deformation of the African people. Now, it says, do black people realize what is being done to them? This is now being gradually realized, although not in its entirety. And we know why. Material will be presented to show that there has been a calculated, organized, sophisticated, continuous, determined attempt to wipe out the image of black people. And while y'all running around and doing God knows what, you're not paying attention. You know what I'm saying? Because it's not important to you. You don't see your spiritual life as being important. You have an idiom of substitution, as I said before, of giving over your spiritual life for, a material life. And when I say material life, I'm not just talking about tangible, because this plane and this sphere that we live in is a material plane. It's a material sphere of energy where we're living. Do you understand and understand that? Although each of these words is very important, it is understood in this very way because blacks will interpret most of it to be incidental, unintentional, and occasional, when in fact it is universal. And this is what I was just saying. You will interpret it to be incidental, unintentional, and occasional, when in fact it is universal. For example, the underlined section of this 1910-1911 article from the Encyclopedia Britannica states that mentally the Negro is inferior to the white. Keep in mind that these are actually scholars talking about the images related to black people. Now, a lot of you already know, and you're probably saying, shit, they ain't superior to me. You know what I'm saying? And I know you got that attitude because that's that inferior godlike particle that's in you. And so you don't play those games. I understand that. But what about the masses of our people who are indoctrinated by different things, who may not have a strong enough constitution to believe that? Let us look at this. And we're gonna come back and continue because the reason why we're going to do that is because I want to give you more, and we want to, of course, keep this going. So here we go. Let's see. Let's look at. Let me enlarge this a little bit. And it says here, and this is a study now. This is a study that has been done. In the beginning of the turn of the century in 1911, and what they thought about us. It says, mentally, the Negro is inferior to the white. The remark of F. Mineta, made after a long study of the Negro in America, may be taken as generally true of the whole race. The Negro children were sharp. Now listen what he said. He said the Negro children were sharp, intelligent, and full of vivacity. But on approaching the adult period, a gradual change set in. The intellect seemed to become clouded, animation giving place to a sort of lethargy, briskness yielding to indolence. We must necessarily suppose that the development of the Negro and white proceeds along different lines, while with the latter, the volume of the brain grows with the expansion of the brain pan. In the former, the growth of the brain is on the contrary arrested by the premature closing of the cranial structures or statures or sutures, and lateral pressure of the frontal bone. Now, let me just say this real quick. And it's kind of funny because there were scientists that did a study some time ago. And what they did when they came up with this study, and this is probably obviously relevant to that and has some comparisons. And what they found was they did a study on the brain, and they said that the Africans, something about his frontal lobe was smaller than the Europeans or something like this. And they said, and they concluded that therefore the European had a higher intellectual capacity to be able to reason, to be able to negotiate or to decipher cognitive, abilities or so forth. And when the study came to find out after they did the comparison with the Negro skeleton brain and so forth and so on, it came out to be a lie. It came out that the Negro was more intelligent. And so what they did was they dismissed that. They dismissed that study and made up some cockamamie story about, So this is what happens. This is what they do. So, and they're still to this day trying to prove the intelligentsia of the European versus the Africoid person. Okay? And so let me continue to read. It says, this explanation is reasonable and even probable as a contributing cause, but evidence is lacking on the subject, and the arrest or even deterioration in the mental development is no doubt very largely due to the fact that after puberty, sexual matters take the first place in the Negro's life and thoughts. Okay. At the same time, his environment has not been such as would tend to produce in him the restless energy which has led to the progress of the white race. In the easy conditions of tropical life and the fertility of the soil have reduced the struggle for existence to a minimum. So you kind of get what they're saying. It says our conditions, if I'm reading this correctly, it says our conditions and our environment has in some way accrued us the ability to have an easier tendency to be able to do things. And let me read this again I know that I'm interpreting this correctly. Such as would tend to produce in him the restless energy which has led to the progress of the white race. Okay, so maybe I didn't read that correctly. He says our restless energy which has led to the progress of the white race. And the easy conditions of a tropical life and the fertility of the soil have reduced the struggle for existence to a minimum. I don't know about that. I'm not totally in agreement with that. But though the mental inferiority of the Negro to the white or yellow races is a fact, it has often been exaggerated. The Negro is largely the creature of his environment, and it is not fair to judge of his mental capacity by tests taken directly from the environment of the white man, which is true. As for instance, tests in mental arithmetic skill and reckoning is necessary to the white race, and it has cultivated this faculty, but it is not necessary to the Negro. So we don't need, basically, we don't need to see what people, in a nutshell, what it's saying, what people sometimes have to get through study, it comes to us innately because we have that 9-ether mitochondrial DNA series. So we have the God particle. You understand? Excuse me. Something to drink here. So, on the other hand, Negroes far surpass white men in acuteness. Listen. On the other hand, they know this. Negroes far pass white men in acuteness of vision, hearing, sense of direction, and topography. The mental constitution of the Negro is very similar to that of a child. Normally good-natured and cheerful, but subject to sudden fits of emotion and passion during which he is capable of performing acts of singular atrocity, which is a lot of bullshit, excuse me. Impressionable, vain, but often exhibiting in the capacity of a servant, a dog-like fidelity, which has stood the supreme test. Now, you have to know better when you do research and you do study, and you have to know how to eat the meat and spit out the bones. You know what I mean? And you have to know how to decipher certain things when they're being written from a Eurocentric perspective. Perspective and point of view. Okay, so here we are. Let us go on. Let us go on. So, it goes on to state that as children, Negroes were bright and intelligent, but as they became adults gradually. Okay.
Do black people realize what is being done to them? The Negro is inferior to the white.
Okay, so now my computer's talking by himself. Okay.
Intentional and occasional when in fact it is universal. For example,
okay, shut up.
section of this 1910 R2. Unshackle your mind. The defamation of the African people. By Alizé.
Okay, see now here it is. See, my computer is talking on his own. I didn't ask it to do that.
Calculated, organized, sophisticated, continuous.
Okay, so see what happens when you are. Okay, so anyways, here we are. So I muted it out. Okay, so it goes on to say, as I read, it was like Negroes were bright and intelligent, but as they became adults, gradually change set in there, and so forth. Okay. So notice how the caricatures of the black male is prominent. Okay, and it talks about of this post, and it talks about, because I have some pictorials and so forth here, and how oftentimes they'll show things of a white man in a posture where he's looking lazy and like he's chilling, like he ain't got nothing to do. He might be somewhere supposed to be chopping wood, but they'll make him look like he's just sitting down with his leg crossed and he's lazy, he ain't doing nothing. So this is to project the impression that he has, support this black male who is just lazy and resting. Okay, so this should be of interest because at this time, if you were to ask the question, who was really working and who was doing the sitting down? True that. It wasn't us who was doing the sitting down. It was them. So who was really lazy? So they have to reverse these stereotypes to make us look like who they were, you know? It would be obvious that the opposite was in fact true, but this is an example of perceptual distortion and denial of reality. Here is another example in the political posters that were developed during the time when Abraham Lincoln was reelected. And an attempt was made to frighten people into believing that. So what they did was they created posters where they had a big lip black man with a white woman. And it instilled the fear in white people that if in fact black people had the opportunity to be in a position, that this is what they were going to do. So if you look at the picture, it says closely, you would notice that the black male is always being caricatured. It was a caricature, which was a very common feature back then. This was, of course, had to do with the movie, The Birth of a Nation. So, let us do this. We're going to stop for a moment, and I'm going to come back in a few moments. So let us pause for a moment, and we'll be right back. Stay with us, okay? And we'll be back in a few. Okay. Stay right there. Okay, we are right back at you. Remember to smash that button, like, share, and subscribe. Do that for us. We appreciate you so much. And we are currently talking about the deformation of African people. Now, where we left off, let's, and I want to remind you, some of the things that were said and how iteration is going to be necessary, okay, so that we get it, so that we get it. And you can actually tell really tell where people's energy fields are in regards to how they respond. People always let you know that. See, one thing about it you have to remember is energy don't lie. And so people by their energy are always lying. You follow me? They're always lying. You say one thing out of your mouth, but your energy field is you're not behaving by universal laws. See, because within your energy field has to support that. And when you are deviating for universal laws, you only create within yourself an imbalance of the internal organisms that are working within you universally. You have to understand and understand that within you there's a universal process that is ongoing simultaneously all the time. And so again, when we mentioned these structures in Kemet and how that these structures, and I'll go over that one more time, and how that these structures, the temple in which the therapy was the contemplation of the symmetrical of geometric solids. In other words, therapy was the image of mathematical cubes, octagons, and various forms of the Chorons, if I'm saying that right. Each one placed upon an altar or pedestal for the contemplation. Now listen to the language. Each of them were placed upon an altar. Now some Christians will say, there he go with that idol worship. You know, that's idol worship. You know, it's amazing how people who don't do no research and no studying will be quick to jump and to say something totally against their own magnetic field. For those of you who get it, you're going to be very powerful. And again, it says each one that was placed upon an altar or pedestal for the contemplation. Understand the words. For the what? Contemplation. Contemplation is what? That you're contemplating something. But listen. For Sephra. Sephra was a deity. All was symmetrical, geometric solids. They were symmetrical, geometrical solids. So it means that the symmetrical and geometrical solids were the pillars that they were looking at, which had engravings of them on it with hieroglyphs, with writings of them understanding the Neteru of the universe, which completed these geometrical solids were perfect and complete instruction. They were complete instruction of the universe. So they saw themselves complete in the universe by the structures that were looking back at them. To look upon them was therapeutic. To look upon them accepted their energy. So when they looked upon these structures, their energy was accepted like, yes, you're right. It was a mirror as a reality in our lives. Though the solid stone structures weren't alive, they only gave their appearance of value, but actually they were alive. They were alive. Do you hear me? I'm reading that again. They were alive. Every form in nature, natural or artificial, has a magnetic field. So that's where you come in. I said you had a magnetic field. But you know what? I'm not gonna go because I'm going into another podcast, and we're gonna do that some other time. So we're gonna continue with what we were discussing. Okay. So we're back to this. And it says, as I formerly read, The Birth of a Nation was based on a novel by Ivan Dixon called The Klansman, which glorified the Ku Klux Klan and talked about how it rescued the South from all these freed slaves, right? But in essence, what was that the movie? Was that what it was really about? For those of you who saw the movie, this was one of the most profound, not profound, but this was one of the most watched movies in history at that time. Now listen. It talks about how they rescued the South from all these free slaves that were beginning to destroy what was present. This movie therefore helped the South to reconceive its images in ways that were positive, especially the role that was played by the Klan. The Birth of the Nation was, with its manipulation of the black image, was one of the factors that caused the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the NAACP, which we all know what that is, right? Which really has no power today because they're receiving money from the untouchables. So you don't have no power when you're receiving money from them. So they know how to water down your organizations where you really can't do anything. You just like your poster child. That's all you are. To come into existence aggressively, national boycotts to ban this movie were organized, yet it was highly successful at the box office as the country at large was praising this type of movie. They loved it. They loved it. They was cheering. Woo! And you know who was doing the most cheering because you know who watched it. You know no black folks wasn't cheering that, and if they were, you know who they were. This current appreciations of this movie regarding what some white Americans had learned was that it fed a subliminal need to identify with those values that were projected in these movies. People were also fascinated with the movie Gone with the Wind as they began talking about how good life was before the slaves were free. Another similar type of movie was Out of Africa, where the white settlers looked back and talked about how good it used to be in Africa before Africans took over their country. Their country. Listen to this. Their country, y'all. Since the United States, and I'm going to say something, is predominantly white, it will project positive image of itself with which should be understood in that way. The Rambo type image, for example, is a total fabrication because that was not the way the heroic Vietnam veteran lived. They said to themselves, but Hollywood will always try to promote and romanticize the image of the white male. That's what they do. And in that particular movie, they talked about Rambo, it was really, if you ask me, it was really it was really a slap in the face to a lot of the brothers that went to Vietnam, and even the white brothers. It was a slap in their face as well, because it didn't happen like that. They lost too many people. Something in the tune of like 58,000 people were slaughtered in Vietnam. So it really wasn't a one war, as reportedly stated so many times. But this is what I was going to say, if I could remember my thought. You have to understand that everything that is done has an agenda. And that you have people who are still trying to find themselves in history. And I also said before is that there is only and I don't want to sound biased, but there is only really one there's a group of people on the planet who have practiced spirituality for centuries. And as I said, everyone else is just imitating. And what I would say is that the closest to come to the Kemetic structure that was set up thousands of years ago, I would have to probably say it would be the Tibetans and the Asian populace, okay? Because when you're talking about, millennia and history and so forth and so on, we're going back to the Champas and the mountain yards and the Nagas of India and the Buddhas and so forth. And we know that the Buddhas were dark-skinned, woolly-haired people as well. And of course, over time, like anywhere else, you've had that faction of migration of people who eventually usurped those areas and became the dominant populace in those geographic areas. Okay, and you can say that you can liken that into whether or not it was genetics or intermingling, of course, would kind of like be the same thing, so forth and so on. But with that being said, I would have to say that in theory, there are just people doing things in practice and in theory as opposed to being it. You follow me? There's a difference. There's a difference in being, and there's a difference in going to a particular place or a particular vocation and practicing. Follow me? So this is what has happened. And so the point that I made, and I think I made it before, is that if we had all of these spiritual people on the planet, think about this. Because now there are people who are appropriating your sacred science, your sacred geometry. They know this better than you do. But what they can't do is to become inferior 9. That's what they can't do. And so when you see all of these movies and you see the means in which they're trying to attain inferior 9 relevance and spirituality, oftentimes, as I just read a moment ago, oftentimes it has to be done through artificial means. And this is why we have now, today in our society, this new apparatus that's called AI, artificial intelligence, to replace, that's why we got to pay attention, to replace the human element. So let's move on. Here is that same cliche again, highlighting the stereotype of a weak, negative image of the black male placed next to a positive image of the white male. And here it is again with the cool Robert Redford type hero on the left and sitting next to him is a frightened, horrified black male with bulging eyes. Total deprivation and demeaning and being pejorative in the whole 9 yards. And so this is why when you brothers, we used to say back in the day, man, you dressed to the 9. A lot of y'all didn't even know. A lot of you didn't even know, and I myself didn't even know what we were saying. When you were saying dressed to the 9, you was talking about 9 ether. You was talking about 9 ether, being a 9 ether being and not realizing what was coming out of your mouth. But it was coming out of your mouth by the providence of the Creator. 9 ether, 9 months for a woman to have a baby. There are 9 planets, right? And we can go on and on. But we'll be talking about, again, the secret secretion. And that's going to be profound too. So, and here it is. And I'm so excited about it. And I know y'all probably saying, man, he's like giving us so much. Unshackle your mind. And it talks about the inferiority of the black man to the white man's supremacy. Okay, if you plant weed in a vegetable garden, a poor harvest will result. The same thing will happen with people. Various types of weed have been planted in the minds of black people, with the larger society who seem to have suffered a convenient memory loss, looking forward to a bountiful harvest. However, to understand how things appear in the present, the not too distant past needs to be investigated. And see, this is why I say a lot of us, you have to stop using substances that block your magnetic field. Alcohol, weed, whatever you're doing, pipe, crack, whatever, is blocking your magnetic field. The other thing is this. The other thing is this. You are an internal being. And in order for you my brother and my sister, to reach that ascension, there are a lot of things actually, you're going to have to let go of. See, because if you don't have no intentions on reaching it, then of course, hey, that's totally up to you. But for those of you who want to, because this is your way out. And see, don't get stuck. Don't get stuck and believe in that religion is going to get you out. See, because that was a wedge that was thrown in to block you from that ascension. And you don't understand that it's going to be you who plays that pivotal role of formulating your etherical magnetic field to take you to that next dimension. That's why I used to say years ago, people used to look at me crazy. They used to look at me real crazy, like, what's wrong with him? When we would talk about being born and all that. And I used to say, I was always here. And they would look at me and like, see, because the concept and perception of being born to some people is that is your beginning. See, in all of these things, which I'm saying to you, all of these things from a Western theological perspective have been infused in you to make you forget. See, but in your memory, in your ancient memory, locked in your inferior DNA is a memory of your past life, your spiritual past life. Just like when you go somewhere and you have deja vu, and you be like, I've been here before. When you've had those type of experiences, it's because you have been. It's because you have been in another life, your spiritual life. And at that time, you had an out-of-body experience. The Creator was giving you a glimpse. But because you were so meshed in the material plane, you didn't get it. When blacks people did not perform in the way whites expected them to, or when they were not readily available, white people would paint themselves black in order to continue playing those negative, stereotypical black roles. This poster, and it's showing and on the poster it says nigga makeup without blacking. And it got a bulging-eyed black person with, big buck teeth. And, boy, the caricatures that they did about us, man, it's just terrible. And it's taken from Johnny's catalog, which was circulated all over the country advertising what they call nigga makeup. White people could now buy nigga makeup or burnt cork to paint their faces black and then go out to either portray these distorted images of black people or to play roles in movies about black people of which they knew nothing about. It is a peculiar, pervasive, twisted kind of connection. The projection of certain kinds of qualities that are inside the minds of the person who is doing this to another racial group of people. Take note, for example, of what is taking place in this photo. A white actor on the left is dressed up in burnt cork to look black, and notice that the role he is playing is the same role that the black actors were hired to play. This white actor is also portraying a weak black male placed side by side to the strong white male image. And of course, a lot of you have heard of Al Jolson. This was just him who played this role back in the day. And the jazz singers made lots of money with his burnt cork blackface routine. While using real black actors as background substitute, he took this concept to a different level by performing in comedy routines that were based on these distorted black images, since he was now in a position where he could project an image of who black people were. Again, note the exaggerated caricatures of the black person portrayed by Al Jolson. And he took these roles and played these roles and made a lot of money off of being pejorative to black people. And unfortunately, you've even had black women who were in these movies who were side by side with him. And, you would have people who would say, oh, well, it was, they didn't have no choice back then, and they had to do this, and they had to. Okay. And it says, black people could not do anything about this state of affairs, which eventually developed into something called minstrel or minstrelsy, which became the most popular form of entertainment in America for 50 years. Soap operas really last that long. So why was there such a fascination for 50 years with the distortion of the black image as the most popular form of entertainment? It was to put in the minds not only of black people and black children that, you are nothing, but to also put in the minds of white people that this is what you have. Be careful of these people. You know what I mean? So it's unfortunate, but that's what's happening. That's what happened then. And in some senses, it's still being done, because now you have people on college campuses who, I guess, whenever they feel it's, they want to do it, they, whether or not they choose a Halloween, and some of you've probably seen this, where they're dressing in blackface, with their fraternities and so forth, to demean and to be pejorative to black people. So it still happens. It still goes on. So anyways, y'all, let me know what you think. I'm going to stop here for now, and we're going to pick it up the next time, and we're going to be talking about the secret secretion. We have some real profound things for you, and we're going to, of course, continue bringing you more of these podcasts. And we want to let you know, of course, we want to know what you think, and make sure that you smash the button for us, please. And we're going to continue to do this for you. Okay? So until next time, you guys have a great evening, and we will see you the next time. Okay? Have a good one.